$4,723 a month. That's the median household income for Americans 65 and older, which means half of all retiree households in this country live on less than that. Not the poor half of some struggling subgroup, half of everyone. And here's what makes that number genuinely surprising. A married couple, both collecting an average Social Security benefit, brings in $142 a month before they touch a single dollar of savings. That's 88% of the way to the median from Social Security alone. To clear the median entirely, that couple needs about $581 more a month, which a portfolio of roughly $174,000 produces at a safe withdrawal rate. $174,000. That's the amount of savings that puts a couple ahead of half the retired households in America. I'm not telling you that to lower your ambitions. I'm telling you because most people carrying anxiety about retirement have never once seen where the actual bar sits, and they're comparing themselves to a number that describes almost nobody. Social Security lands almost everyone in the same place, and what you add on top is the entire difference. I'm Mike, a regular guy who reached financial freedom on an ordinary income. This channel is where I explain the money stuff nobody ever sat us down and explained, the way I'd explain it to a friend across the kitchen table. If that's your thing, hit subscribe. Let me give you the whole ladder, because seeing all of it at once is what makes your own position obvious. At the bottom, the lowest 10% of adults 65 and older take in under about $15,000 a year, which is $1,250 a month. That's people living almost entirely on a below-average Social Security check. In a country where the typical older household spends far more than that, the median household, as I said, is at $4,723 a month. Break that down by age, and it drops as people get older, with households 65 to 74 running somewhere between $61,000 and $69,000 a year, while those 75 and up are down at $47,790, or about $3,982 a month. At the top, the highest 10% of older adults bring in more than about $188,000 a year, which is over $15,600 a month. So the 90th percentile earns roughly 12 times what the 10th percentile does. Now here's the number that reframes the whole conversation, and it's the one nobody quotes. The mean income for households 65 and older is $87,260 a year, or $7,272 a month, while the median is $56,680, or $4,723. The average is about 1.5 times the middle. That gap exists for the same reason it exists everywhere in personal finance. Averages get destroyed by extremes. Picture a doctor's waiting room with 10 retirees in it. 9 of them live on somewhere between $3,000 and $6,000 a month, and the 10th sold a business years ago and lives on $60,000 a month. The average income in that room is over $9,000, which describes not one single person sitting there. The median is around $4,500, which describes almost everyone. Same 10 people, and one number tells you the truth, while the other tells you about the one person in the corner. That's the national picture in miniature. A relatively small number of very wealthy retirees pulls the mean far above what a typical retiree actually lives on. So when someone reads that the average retirement income is over $7,000 a month and concludes they're behind at $5,000, they've compared themselves to a figure that describes the top third rather than the middle. There's a second distinction that matters even more, and it's the one that trips people up when they try to place themselves on this ladder. Every number I just gave you is household income. Individual income is a completely different picture. The median income for an individual 65 and older is $33,313, which is $2,776 a month. And for the 4/5 of older adults who are fully retired with no earnings from work at all, the median is $26,772 a year, or about $2,231 a month. Set those against the household figures. A single retiree living on $2,300 a month sits at roughly the middle of fully retired individuals, while a couple living on $4,700 a month sits at roughly the middle of households. Those are the same person's life at different bar heights. And comparing yourself to the wrong one is how you end up either falsely comforted or needlessly frightened. So the honest first answer to the question in the title is this. A couple bringing in more than about $4,723 a month is ahead of half of American retiree households. Single and fully retired with more than about $2,231 a month puts you ahead of half of fully retired individuals. Social Security lands almost everyone in the same place, and what you add on top is the entire difference. Now let me explain the mechanism behind why the bar is where it is, because it tells you what actually moves you up the ladder. Social Security is a compressing force. It's designed to replace a larger share of income for lower earners than for higher ones. So someone who earned $45,000 and someone who earned $120,000 don't receive proportionally different benefits. The consequence is that a huge share of American retirees cluster in a narrow band, which means the difference between the 50th percentile and the 75th isn't a doubling of anything. It's a modest amount layered on top of a base almost everyone shares. Look at what that does to the math of moving up. Getting from the median to roughly the 75th percentile takes an additional $2,941 a month above to Social Security checks, which a portfolio of about $882,000 produces. That's a real amount of money, and it's an achievable one for a household that saved consistently. Getting to the top 10% is genuinely different, requiring about $11,525 a month above Social Security, which would take a portfolio of roughly $3.5 million. So, the ladder isn't evenly spaced. The distance from the bottom to the median is small. The distance from the median to the upper middle is moderate. And the distance from there to the top is enormous. Most of the anxiety in this country is about a gap that's much smaller than the gap people picture. Where that income comes from explains the ladder better than the totals do. Social Security is the largest single component for most households at $2,770 a month. Pensions exist for a shrinking minority. Investment income is far smaller than people assume, with the median for retirees well under $5,000 a year, because most savings sit concentrated in the top quarter of households. Look at what that composition implies. For the household at the median, Social Security is doing the overwhelming majority of the work, and their portfolio is contributing a few $100s a month. Move up to the top quartile and there's a second stream carrying real weight. The distribution isn't shaped by who invested better, it's shaped by who has more than one reliable pipe. Now the finding I think is the most useful in this entire video, because it's about what actually separates people rather than how much they have. When you look at what households in the top quartile of retirement income have in common, it isn't primarily a bigger portfolio. It's that they have at least one source of guaranteed income beyond Social Security, meaning a pension or an annuity. That's the single most reliable marker of being in the upper part of this distribution. Only about 22% of private sector workers have access to a traditional pension, which explains a great deal about who ends up where. A retired teacher or firefighter with a modest portfolio can easily out-earn a private sector retiree with substantially more. Savings? Because the pension arrives every month regardless of markets and never has to be rationed against the fear of running out. For the majority without a pension. The upper part of this distribution belongs to people with two guaranteed streams rather than one. And you can partially manufacture that. The free version is delaying Social Security, which turns one modest guaranteed check into a much larger one. Since claiming at 70 instead of 62 raises your benefit about 77% for life, inflation adjusted and impossible to outlive. The other is converting part of your savings into an annuity. I'm not a fan of annuities as a default, because the products vary enormously in cost and complexity is where fees hide. But a simple immediate annuity covering the gap between your guaranteed income and your essential expenses is a legitimate tool, and it's what the top quartile has by accident of employment. Let me also address what the ladder doesn't tell you, because a comparison video that stops at percentiles is doing you a disservice. Income rankings ignore two things. The first is housing. And a couple with $4,700 a month and a paid-off house is in dramatically better shape than a couple with $6,000 a month, paying $1,900 in rent, even though the second ranks higher. Owning outright is worth about $18,000 a year in a way that never appears in an income statistic. The second is geography. Median household income for older Americans ranges from about $91,395 in Hawaii down to $44,031 in Mississippi, which is more than a twofold spread. Being at the median nationally means something completely different depending on where you live, and a number that's tight in one state is comfortable in another. A third thing the ladder hides is that your position on it will change as you age, usually downward. Household income for the 65 to 74 group runs $61,000 to $69,000, while for those 75 and older, it falls to $47,790. Part-time work stops, portfolios drawn down without a plan run thinner, and when one spouse dies, the household keeps only the larger of the two Social Security checks, which can cut guaranteed income nearly in half, while the property taxes, insurance, and utilities stay exactly where they were. That last one deserves attention if you're part of a couple, because it's the single most common way a household that ranked comfortably at 70 finds itself well below the median at 80. It's also why delaying the higher earner's benefit matters more than delaying a lower one, since the larger check is the one the survivor keeps for the rest of their life. So the percentile answers the question in the title, and it's the first of 3 layers. It tells you where you stand against other people. The second layer tells you something the first one can't, which is whether that income covers your own life, and it comes from a comparison with only one other number, not what other retirees make, what your life costs. Before that comparison works, though, you have to know what actually arrives, because the number you rank with is not the number you spend. That $4,723 is gross, and several things take a share before any of it becomes usable. Housing goes first and has the widest range of anything on the list. A mortgage-free retiree in a modest area might spend a few hundred a month on property taxes and insurance. A renter in an expensive metro can spend $2,000 before a single other bill gets paid. That one variable can swing more than most people's entire portfolio withdrawal. Healthcare goes next, and is a detail here that surprises people. Medicare premiums are usually deducted directly from your Social Security payment, which means the check that lands in your account is already smaller than the benefit you were quoted. If you budgeted around $2,071 and a deposit reads less, that's why. Taxes take a share that depends entirely on where the money came from. Pension income and traditional 401k withdrawals are taxed as ordinary income, and a rising income can also drag more of your Social Security into the taxable range. Two retirees with identical gross income can keep noticeably different amounts based purely on which accounts they filled during their working years. Then come the costs that don't scale with income at all: transportation, auto insurance, and any debt you carried across the line cost roughly the same dollars whether you're at the median or the 90th percentile, which means they consume a far larger share of a smaller income. A car payment and a credit card balance are a portion of every monthly check that's spent before it arrives. And there's one more that rarely appears in any budget, which is money flowing to adult children or grandchildren. It's usually unplanned and irregular, which is exactly why it erodes an income that looked entirely adequate on paper. Subtract all of that, and you can see why two households at the same rank can experience completely different retirements, which is the whole reason the second layer matters more than the first. Take your expected monthly spending. Subtract your Social Security and any pension, and whatever gap remains is what your savings has to produce. Multiply that gap by 300 and you have your real target. A couple spending $5,500 a month with 2 average benefits has a gap of about $1,358 now, which takes roughly $407,000 to fund. That couple is fine, and they'd be fine whether they ranked at the 40th percentile or the 70th. Because their income covers their life, which brings the third layer, and is the one that decides whether the second layer holds up over time. The gap is a snapshot taken today. Durability asks whether that snapshot survives 20 more years, and it depends on how your income is built rather than how large it is. Two households can report the identical $6,000 a month and be in completely different situations. One gets $4,442 from 2 Social Security checks and $1,858 from a portfolio, so most of their income is inflation adjusted, guaranteed, and impossible to outlive. The other gets $2,770 from a single check and $39,2929 from a portfolio. So the majority depends on markets cooperating and on them not living too long. On a ranking table, they're tied. In reality, one can sleep through a bear market and the other cannot. That's why I keep pointing at the guaranteed income question rather than the total. The right way to assess your own position is to ask what percentage of your essential expenses, meaning housing, food, utilities, insurance, and healthcare, is covered by income that arrives no matter what. If that number is above 100%, market crashes become an inconvenience rather than a threat, and everything your portfolio produces is genuinely discretionary. If it's at 60%, you're exposed in a way no income percentile will ever reveal. So the three layers stack rather than compete. The percentile tells you where you sit among other people. The gap tells you whether your income covers your life. Durability tells you whether it keeps covering it. Each one is closer to the truth than the one before, and only the last one is what you actually live inside. That said, if you want to move up the ladder, the levers are specific, and I'll rank them by how much they actually move the number. The largest by a wide margin is when you claim Social Security. Going from 62 to 70 raises an average benefit from roughly $1,450 to $2,568 a month permanently. That's $1,118 more every month, which by itself is nearly double what a couple needed to cross the median. To generate that same income from savings, you'd need about $335,000 more invested. Nothing else on this list comes close, and it's a decision made with a form. The second is working a little longer or differently, which lets savings grow, removes years the money must cover, and lets you delay Social Security. Roughly 1 in 4 Americans 65 and older still works, earning a median of about $24,000 a year, which is $2,000 a month, requiring no portfolio at all. The third is your housing cost, which is the largest expense most households have and the one with the most room in it. Eliminating a mortgage before you retire, or moving somewhere cheaper, doesn't raise your income, but it lowers the income you need, which accomplishes the same thing from the other direction. The fourth is how much of your income you keep, which is where account structure matters. Two retirees with identical gross income can have meaningfully different spendable income depending on whether their money sits in traditional or Roth accounts. Because traditional withdrawals are taxable and can also drag more of your Social Security into the taxable range. Here's your one job after this video. Find your own number and place it honestly, using the right comparison. If you're part of a couple, use household figures, and if you're single and fully retired, use the individual ones. Because mixing them up is the most common way people misjudge their position. Add up everything that arrives in a month, meaning Social Security, any pension, and what your portfolio realistically produces at about 4% a year divided by 12. Then, compare that total to $4,723 for a couple or $2,231 for a fully retired individual, and you'll know which side of the middle you're on. Then do the more important calculation, which is subtracting your guaranteed income from your actual monthly spending, because that gap is the only number that determines whether you're okay. Social Security lands almost everyone in the same place, and what you add on top is the entire difference. So the question worth answering is how much you actually need on top, not how you rank against strangers. If this was useful, hit subscribe. This is what I do every week, plain English, nothing to sell you. Next video, I'm going deep on the largest lever in this entire ranking, which is exactly when to claim Social Security. 62, 67, or 70, the break-even math that most people get backwards, and the specific situations where claiming early genuinely is the right answer. I'll walk you through how to decide for your own life. I'm Mike. I'll see you in the next one.